Well, hey, friends, welcome back to Leadership Clearly, the podcast for Christian leaders who want to grow with clarity, strengthen communication, and build teams that actually last. I'm Julie Wagner, your communication coach, corporate leader, and your coach in this space where we tell the truth about leadership, we lean on Jesus, and we get really practical about what it takes to actually lead people. Before we dive into today's episode, I want to talk to you about something so exciting. If you've ever walked away from a conversation as a leader thinking, that's not what I meant, or why didn't that land the way I expected? I want you to listen closely. I'm getting ready to launch something new called the Clarity Code. This is a 5-day communication bootcamp designed to help leaders have stronger conversations and lead with confidence. It's simple, practical, and affordable. And if communication has been a friction point for you as a leader, this is for you. You can join the waitlist now. Just head to the link in the show notes. Or you can go to juliewagner.co/bootcamp. Okay, now grab your coffee, grab your journal or your note-taking device, and let's dive into today's episode. Okay, I need to start today's episode with a little bit of a confession because this topic, I have been on both sides of it. And I think that's probably true for a lot of you listening right now. Brené Brown is one of my favorite authors, and she has changed how a whole generation of leaders think about vulnerability. And I mean that genuinely. Her research, guys, it is so real. Her work is so incredibly important. And if you've not read Dare to Lead, that's my favorite book out of all of them, or any of her books, Dare to Be Brave. I mean, there's a whole slew of them. Go read a couple of them. Go grab that audiobook if you don't have time to read it, and you can listen to it throughout the day. It's all good. You guys will love her, I promise. And if you already know who she is, you probably already know how much you respect her and admire her for the work she's done. This woman has done more to humanize leadership in the last 15 years than I think almost anyone else in the space. And I'm genuinely grateful for the work she has chosen to put out into the world. But here is the thing that nobody really wants to talk about right now. There is a version of vulnerability happening in leadership right now in this day and age that is not actually building trust. It's not actually creating connection, and it is definitely not making leaders more effective. It's doing something else entirely. And the leaders who are caught in it usually have no idea because everything they've been taught tells them that they're already doing the right thing. So today we're going to talk about it. We're going to honor what Brené has done right, what she's got nailed down. We're going to name what's going sideways, and I'm going to give you a framework you can actually use to know the difference between vulnerability that builds your team up and vulnerability that quietly burns it down. Now, before I dive in, I want to name something right now. This episode might step on a few toes, mine included, okay? Very transparent with you. Because there have been seasons in my leadership where I thought I was being vulnerable, I was connecting with my team. And then I got to tell you, looking back and reflecting, I was actually doing something else. I was processing in front of them. I was leaking, which sounds weird, but you'll understand it more when we talk about this a little bit more into context. But I was so committed to being real and transparent that I forgot my team needed me to also be steady. So if any of this hits a nerve, just sit with it. We're not here to shame anyone. We're here to grow. And growth almost always feels like a little bit of a sting before it feels like freedom. So let's go. I want to start by giving Brené Brown her flowers because what she got right is monumental. For decades, the leadership world operated on this idea that the leader had to be the strongest person in the room, the most certain, the most polished, the one with all the answers. And what Brené's research showed, and what she has actually spent her whole career proving, is that kind of leadership does not actually work. It does not build trust. It does not create teams that perform at a high level. It creates compliance. And compliance is not the same thing as commitment, my friends. And what she showed is that leaders who are willing to be human, who can say, I do not have all the answers, who can own a mistake, who can be honest about a hard season, those leaders build teams that lean in. They build cultures where people feel safe enough to take risks. They build environments where innovation actually happens because people, they're not having to spend all their energy hiding their imperfections. That's real. That is researched back. That is truth. And I've lived it. I can think of very specific moments in my own leadership where I sat down with my team and said something like, I'm wrestling with this decision. I have not figured it out yet. Here's what I'm thinking, and here's where I need your help. And what happened in those moments was not what the old leadership playbook said would happen. They didn't lose respect for me. They didn't see me as weak. They actually leaned in. They engaged. They brought their best thinking to the table because I had already created this space for them to do that. So let me say this very clearly. Vulnerability is a leadership superpower. Brené is right. The research is right. Being human in front of your team is one of the most powerful things you can do. But this is the part that nobody talks about. Maybe they don't want to talk about it. It's very uncomfortable, etc. But there is a difference between being vulnerable and being unprocessed. There is a difference between being honest and being unfiltered. There is a difference between letting your team see you and asking your team to carry you. And right now in 2026, we have a generation of leaders who have read Dare to Lead, who have watched all the TED Talks, who have absorbed the message that vulnerability equals strength. And they've taken that message and applied it without the nuance, without the context, without the discernment that the research actually requires. The result is what I'm calling the vulnerability trap. And I want to walk you through 3 specific ways I see it showing up, because once you can see it, you can start to lead differently. The first form the vulnerability trap takes is oversharing. Now, stay with me on this one, because I'm not talking about sharing things you shouldn't share. I'm not talking about the confidentiality breaches or telling your team something that should have stayed private in a meeting. I'm talking about something a little more subtler than that, something more emotional, something that looks like vulnerability on the surface, but it's actually doing damage underneath. Oversharing in leadership looks like this. You walk into a meeting and you say, hey team, I'm just going to be honest. I'm really stressed out right now. The board is breathing down my neck. I did not sleep last night. I'm not even sure I'm going to make payroll this quarter. But anyways, let's talk about Q3 strategy. Now, on the surface, that feels real, right? It feels honest. It feels like you're being vulnerable and transparent and human in front of your team. But let me ask you something. What did you just do to your team's nervous system? You just walked into a room and you dumped your stress on them. You took everything that you've been carrying alone at 3 a.m, the things that you have not even processed with God yet, and you handed them to your team. And now they're going to spend the next 8 hours of their workday quietly worried about whether they're going to have a job next month. They're going to text their spouse on a break. They're going to pull a coworker aside on Teams if you're remote or in the office and say, did you hear what she just said in that meeting? Should we be looking for a new job? And you feel better because you just got it off your chest. You processed, you shared. But here's what actually happened. You did not lead, you leaked. There's a phrase I want you to write down somewhere today. It's the question I want you to ask yourself before you share any hard thing with your team. So here's the question. Am I sharing this to connect, or am I sharing this because I need someone to carry it with me? Read that again. Am I sharing this to connect, or am I sharing this because I need someone to carry it with me? Because one of those builds culture, the other one burdens it. When you share to connect, you've already done the work, right? You've already sat with the hard thing. You've already been honest with God about it. You've already prayed about it. You've already wrestled it down to a place where you can speak about it from a steady ground. And when you bring it into the room, your team can receive it as humanity. They can lean in. they can connect with you over it because you're not asking them to fix it. You're not asking them to manage your feelings about it. You're simply being human in front of them. But when you share because you need someone to carry it with you, even unconsciously, even with the best of intentions, you are asking your team to do something they cannot actually do. They cannot fix your stress. They cannot solve the board pressure or the leadership pressure that you're carrying. They cannot make you sleep at night. And when you put that into the room, what they end up carrying is not the actual problem. They carry the weight of your unprocessed emotion. And that is heavy. It is exhausting. That is the kind of leadership. Gosh, I got to say, that is the kind of leadership that quietly drives high performers out the door because they did not sign up to manage their leader's emotional life. They signed up to do good work. And I want to be really clear here. This is not about being a robot. It's not about hiding everything. This is not about going back to that old leadership model where you have to be perfect and polished all the time. That model is broken. And guys, we are not going back to that. Okay. This is about discernment. This is about asking yourself before you share, have I done the work on this yet? Have I taken this to the feet of Jesus? Have I sat with it long enough that I can speak about it and speak to it from a steady place? Or am I about to pull this out of my chest and drop it on the conference table because I need somewhere to put it? If it's the second one, and I'm saying this with so much love, that is not vulnerability. That is venting. And your team, guys, it's not your therapist. Your team is not your friend group. Your team is the people God has entrusted to your leadership, and they need you to lead them. A practical thing you can do, and I've started doing this in my own life, is keep a short list of people who are not on your team. A spouse, a trusted friend, a coach, a pastor, someone who can hold the unprocessed version of you, someone you can call at 3:00 in the morning and say, I am terrified about this thing. That's where the raw vulnerability goes first. Then, after you've processed it there, you can decide what, if anything, needs to come into the leadership space. Because the goal is not to never let your team see that you're real, that you're human, that you deal with this kind of stuff. The goal is to make sure what they see is humanity that has already been studied by something other than them. The second form the vulnerability trap takes, and this one is sneakier, is using vulnerability as a substitute for decisiveness. This one I have done. I'm not going to lie. So I am speaking from experience. I will tell you what this looks like because I want you to be able to spot it in yourself. Here's how it shows up. You have a hard decision on the table. Maybe you need to let someone go. Maybe you need to kill a project that people on your team have been really invested in. Maybe you need to tell a client something they don't want to hear. Maybe you need to set a boundary with a colleague who's been crossing one for months. And it's hard. It's genuinely hard because it's going to disappoint someone. It's going to cost someone something. It's going to require you to use your authority in a way that feels uncomfortable. So you call a meeting and you go into the meeting and you say, hey, all, I just want to be really vulnerable with you right now. I want to tell you that this is really hard for me. I've been wrestling with this. I'm not sure what the right call is. I want to hear your input. I want to bring everyone in on this, right? And then you talk for 45 minutes about how hard it is, about what you're weighing, about all the considerations, about how much you care about everyone involved. And then the meeting ends and no decision gets made. So you schedule another meeting. You bring more people in. You ask for more input. You process more in the open. You journal about it. You pray about it. You talk to your coach about it. You bring it back to the team. 6 weeks goes by. The decision has still not yet been made. The thing that needed to happen has not happened. And meanwhile, the situation that required getting the decision has gotten worse because the longer you wait, the worse most leadership decisions get. And here's the thing, from the outside, you look like the most thoughtful, careful, vulnerable, inclusive leader that anyone has ever worked for. You're involving everyone. You're not making decisions in a silo. You're not old school autocratic. You're leading the way the books said to lead. But what is actually happening is that you have used the language of vulnerability as a beautifully decorated escape hatch from the responsibility of being the one who decides. This is what no one talks about or tells you about when you become a leader. At a certain level, the buck stops with you. There are decisions that no amount of input is going to make for you. There are calls that nobody else can make. And the role you signed up for when you took on that leadership role is being the person who, after all the input is gathered and all the wrestling is done, says, this is what we're doing. That is leadership. That is what your team is paying you to do. That is what the people who follow you need from you. And when you swap that for endless processing in the name of vulnerability, you're not actually being humble, you're being scared. And the fear is wearing a really pretty costume. I want to give you a hard word here because somebody listening needs it. Indecision is a decision. When you do not make the call, guess what? You've made the call. You have decided that the status quo, however broken it is what you can live with. You have decided that your discomfort with making the hard choice is more important than the team's need for clarity, the client's need for an answer, the company's need for direction. That is the actual decision you're making, even when it doesn't feel like one. Now, hear me out. Sometimes the right decision actually is to take more time. Sometimes you need to genuinely get more information. Sometimes you need to just pray longer. You need to sit with it longer. You need more input. That's real. That's wisdom. The Bible literally tells us in Proverbs 15 that in an abundance of counselors, there is wisdom. Getting input is not the problem. A good test for yourself is this. Set a deadline. Tell your team, I'm going to make this call by Friday at 5. Get all the input you need, pray about it, sit with it, and then on Friday at 5, decide. Even if you're not totally sure. Especially if you're not totally sure. Because leadership is not always about being certain. Leadership is about being willing to make the call from steady ground even when certainty is not on the menu. You can be vulnerable about how hard a decision is. You can be honest that you do not love having to make it. You can acknowledge what it's going to cost, but then you make the decision because that's the job. And vulnerability that does not result in action is not really vulnerability. It's just very poetic procrastination. So here's the third form the vulnerability trap takes. This is the one guys, I think this is the one that's the most dangerous. And it's because it usually looks the most innocent. It's bringing unprocessed fear into the room. Here's what this looks like. You're in a strategy meeting. The team is talking about a big new initiative. Everyone's excited. Energy is high. People are bringing ideas. And you, being the leader, say something like, I just want to be honest. I'm really nervous about this. I have a bad feeling and I do not know if this is going to work. I have seen things like this fail before. And then everyone goes quiet. You just sucked all the energy out of the room. The conversation stalls. What happened? You took a fear that had not been processed yet, a real, valid leader level concern, and you dumped it directly into the team's psychological space. And now they cannot move forward because the person they're looking to for direction has just said with full vulnerability and authenticity that they think this might fail. Now, here's the thing. Your fear probably is totally valid. You might have really good instincts and good discernment. The thing might actually be a really bad idea. That's not what I'm questioning, though. What I'm questioning is whether the team meeting was the right place for that fear to come out for the first time. There's a difference between sharing a concern that you've already wrestled with, maybe one that you've already prayed about, taken to your coach, process with a peer, examine it, whether this is truth or maybe it's anxiety, versus sharing a fear that is still raw and unexamined. The first one sounds like, I want to flag something I've been thinking about for the last 2 weeks. Here are 3 specific things I'm tracking. Here's what I think we need to address before we move forward. That's leadership. That's bringing a processed concern into the room in a way the team can actually do something with. The second one sounds like, I just have a really bad feeling about this. That is anxiety in a leader's body that has now been transferred to the entire team's body. And now everyone is anxious and nobody knows what to do with it. Your team is always watching you, always. They're reading your face, your tone, your posture, your energy, way more than they are listening to your words. And when you bring unprocessed fear into the room, they pick it up before you even finish the sentence. They feel it, they start to mirror it. And then suddenly the entire team is operating from a place of anxiety instead of clarity. And you've lost 20 IQ points across the room before you've even gotten to do the actual work. I want to give you a really practical filter for this. Before you share a fear with your team, ask yourself, have I sat with this long enough to know whether this is a real concern or is this just an anxiety spike? Because they're not the same thing. Real concerns can be named, they can be articulated, and they can be addressed. Anxiety spikes are often really something else entirely, okay? Fatigue, a hard week at work, an old wound that this situation might be poking at, maybe something unresolved under there. And if you're bringing an anxiety spike into your team meeting and present it as a strategic concern, you are going to hijack a conversation that did not need to be hijacked. A great question to ask yourself in this moment is this: if I sleep on this for one night, will I still feel this way? If the answer is yes, bring it up tomorrow. If the answer is I did not know, bring it up tomorrow. But if you cannot answer it confidently, that is a signal that the fear is not ready to come into the room yet. And again, to be totally clear, I'm not telling you to suppress your fears. I am not telling you to perform uncertainties that you do not have. I'm telling you to honor your team enough to do the work on the fear before you put it on their shoulders. There is a pastor out there, his name is Chad Veach, and he says this, and I think about this a lot in context, right? This is something that I love watching his podcast. He talks about how there is a version of authenticity that draws people in, and there is a version that makes people feel unsafe. Your team needs to know that you're real, and they need to know that you're steady, both at the same time. Guys, steady does not mean fake. Steady does not mean closed off. Steady means that the foundation underneath you is not your own emotional state. The foundation underneath you is something deeper than that. And when your team can feel that you are anchored to something steady, they can be themselves. They can take risks. They can do hard things because they know that whatever happens, you're not going to come unglued. Okay, so I've spent a lot of time really talking about what the trap looks like, right? Now I want to spend some time on what healthy vulnerability actually looks like in leadership. Because I do not want anyone walking away from this episode thinking that the answer is to just go back to the old model and never let anyone on your team see that you're human. That's not the answer. Healthy vulnerability in leadership has a few specific markers, and I want to give you some examples. So the first one is what I call processed honesty. It sounds like I don't have all the answers on this yet, but here is how we're going to find them. Notice the structure. You're admitting that you don't know. That's the vulnerable part, but you're immediately following it with a path forward. You're not leaving your team in the limbo of uncertainty. You're not saying, I don't know yet, and here's what we're going to do about it. That and is everything. The second one is owning a mistake without spiraling in public self-doubt. This drives me crazy. And I see people doing it on social media. There is a huge difference between, hey team, I made a mistake on that call last week. I should have run the numbers more carefully before we committed. Here's what I'm going to do differently going forward. That's a leader. That's ownership. That's humility. Versus, I just feel like I've been failing all of you. I do not know if I am cut out for this. I'm wondering if I should even be in this role. I just feel really bad about that decision. Guys, that is not vulnerability. That is asking your team to reassure you. That is making your team's day about managing your insecurity. And your team will do it because they care about you for the most part. But it costs them something, and it costs you something too, because it slowly chips away at their confidence in you. Own the mistake. Take responsibility. Name what you're doing differently. Move on. Let the recovery be visible without making the recovery the whole show. The third marker of healthy vulnerability is this: letting your team see your faith in action, not just your certainty, but your trust in God when things are uncertain. This is something that I think Christian leaders have a unique opportunity to model, okay? There is a posture that says, I did not know how this is going to work out, and I trust the one who does. It is so different from, I did not know how this is going to work out. I'm terrified. Here's everything I'm scared about right now. It's the same starting point, right? Uncertainty. But the foundation underneath is completely different. One is anchored in your own emotional state, the other is anchored to something bigger. When your team sees that, when they see you walk into a hard season and say, this is hard, I'm bringing it to God, I'm trusting Him with the outcome. In the meantime, here's what we're going to do today. That is not just leadership, my friends, that is testimony. And it's one of the most powerful things you can give to the people you lead. The goal of all of this is what I call a rare combination. Your team feels close to you and they feel confident in you, both at the same time. They feel like you're real with them. They feel like they know you. They feel like you're a human being and not a corporate robot. And they feel like the foundation underneath your leadership is steady. Like you're not going to come apart on them. Like they can take risks and bring hard news to you and disagree with you because you're anchored to something that does not move every time the wind picks up. That combination is rare. That combination is what people will be loyal to for a decade. That combination is what builds the kinds of teams that the rest of the industry looks at and says, what are they doing over there? I want us to land in scripture because this is where the whole conversation gets its real foundation for me. 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 9, Paul writes, but he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly about my weakness, so that Christ's power may rest on me. Let's sit with that for a second. Paul is the most accomplished leader of the early church, okay? He plants churches. He writes the majority of the New Testament. He's the original case study in what apostolic leadership looks like. And what he says about his own weakness, I have always just found it fascinating. He doesn't hide it. That's the first thing. He doesn't put on a polished, perfect Paul show for the people he's leading. He talks openly about the thorn in his flesh. He talks about the times he was beaten, imprisoned, shipwrecked. He talks about being weary and afraid. But, and here's a part I want you to make sure you catch this, he never performs in his weakness. He never wallows in it. He never makes the people he is leading carry it for him. What he does is something completely different. He reframes it. He says, in essence, this is the place where God shows up. My weakness is not a liability to my leadership. My weakness is the doorway through which Christ's power enters the situation. That is the posture. That is the difference. That is the whole game, my friends. Your weakness, named honestly and held faithfully, is not a liability. It's your testimony. The difference between a vulnerability trap and a vulnerability testimony is what you do with the hard thing before you bring it into the room. Do you trust it with God first? Do you process it with Him? Do you bring it to Him before you bring it to your team? Because when you do that, when you come in already having sat with the hard thing and come out the other side with even just an inkling and a thread of trust, what your team sees is not your struggle. They see your faith in action. And that is the most powerful leadership you will ever do. I want to give you a phrase. I want you to write this down, tattoo it on your brain or your arm if you want. Make it the question you ask yourself every time you are about to share something hard with your team. Lead from your testimony, not your trauma. Say it again. Lead from your testimony, not your trauma. The difference between the two is whether the hard thing has actually been touched by God yet. Trauma is the unprocessed version. Testimony is what trauma becomes after God has done His work in it. Both are real. Both are honest. But one of them is ready to be brought into the leadership space, and the other one, please leave it at the door. It's not. Don't bring it in. Don't bring it into the boardroom. The leaders I most respect, the ones who have been doing this for 30, 40, 50 years and they're still going strong, guys, they have this figured out. They're honest, they're real, they're deeply vulnerable in the right contexts, but they do not bleed all over their team. They process the hard things in the right rooms with God, with their spouse, with their coach, with a peer, with someone they trust, and then they bring the steadied version of themselves into the leadership space. That is the model. That is the calling. Before I close out today, I just want to say one more thing. If any of this is stirring something in you about how you communicate, how you maybe show up with your team, how you hold authority while still being real, the Clarity Code Bootcamp is built exactly for that. It's a 5-day intensive that gives you a framework you're going to use in every single leadership conversation from this point forward. We go over the 4 communication types, how you're wired to lead, and a repeatable strategy for the high-stakes conversations that really matter the most. The link is in the show notes, and if today's episode hit a nerve, maybe that's your sign. Go check it out. Okay, that's your episode for the day. And listen, I know that this one might have stepped on some toes a little bit. Mine included, honestly, but that's what we do here. We tell the truth because the truth is what actually makes you a better leader. Being real between the gaps is what creates the room for them to close. Here's what I want you to do this week. Pick one of the 3 traps we talked about. The oversharing one, the vulnerability as an exit from decision one, or the unprocessed fear one. Pick the one that feels closest to home. Don't try to fix things overnight. Do not beat yourself up for being human. Just notice. Watch yourself for the next 7 days. See where it shows up. Get curious. Ask God to show you what's underneath it. That is how change starts. Not with a big dramatic overhaul, but with awareness. With one small, honest moment of seeing yourself clearly. That is enough for this week. Now, if this episode resonated with you, share it, screenshot it, tag a leader in your life who needs help trying to figure out this balance, because I promise you, someone in your life needs to hear this today. And I would love to hear from you. DM me on Instagram, send me an email, tell me where it hit for you, tell me what trap you saw yourself in, tell me what you're going to do about it. I read every message and I love hearing how this is landing in your real leadership. My friends, lead from your testimony, not from your trauma. I will see you next week. Keep leading clearly.